Okay, today's video will be about China. The reason I'm making this video, it's rather simple. The video is going to be simple, and the reason I'm making it is also simple. Basically, today in a class, a Black Studies class about, it's called From Plantations to Prisons, and I'll just leave it at that because describing it in any more detail may not be such a good idea. But the class is ultimately, the goal of the class is to help students understand the way that prisons are used as a tool of control, similar to plantations and slavery, and how capitalism has used new methods to manifest to create underclasses that could be exploited for the purposes of extracting more profits from these groups. And it's a wonderful class for that reason. But today in my presentation, which was about global militarism, we have the point of the presentation is that we present on a couple of things that maybe students weren't aware of, and then we open up a discussion amongst the whole class. And during this discussion, the idea that United States hegemony came up. Obviously not in those terms. Most people don't speak in those terms. But there was a moment where we were talking about, I was talking about, or the whole presentation was just about what military spending does. What is the military in a global context, and how does that connect to policing? And he brought up the fact that he feels more comfortable with the United States maintaining its position as global hegemon, because otherwise someone else will take its place, and that someone would be China. So the purpose of this video will be to explain why that's actually a great thing, at least given what we know about China and what we know about the United States. Now, I wish I took more time in class to counter this man's points, to explain to him how his thinking was biased in a number of ways and driven by narratives that liberals and, everyone to the right of liberals, who are just, liberal plus really, but it's a topic for another day, how liberals and neoliberals and neoconservatives, etc., use fear-mongering against China to avoid facing the reality that not only is China better than us, like technologically speaking, in terms of the affordability of life in China, and a number of things like that. China is also a more morally upstanding country. Not to say that China is a good country. China is a country. That's the thing that I think is often lost in these discussions. China is a country, and all countries are pieces of garbage because states, unfortunately, are remarkably flippant to the value of human lives. And I think it's the point of a government is to help people do things that people couldn't do without coming together. We come together and we form these political bodies. And so they should do good things for us. That is the hope. And unfortunately, many governments, and really all governments, they may do that in some respects, but in many other respects, they're also violating the very sanctity of human life. It's a remarkable shame. But so, let's just go one by one, right? So what he said in the class, he was like, oh yeah, China's going to take its place in China's human rights violations. And then I responded and I said, well, look, the governments of the United States, the UK, of Australia, and much of Europe have actively collaborated in the genocide of the Palestinians by Israel done with American weapons and with direct and most aggressively American support, while also being supported by other Western countries. How could you say that China is as big of a human rights violator as the United States? And in response, not just him, but other people in the class, they brought up China's, you could call it an ethnic cleansing, you could call it a cultural erasure in Xinjiang. I like the term cultural erasure. I think it really gets at the point, at the actual argument, right? Because the biggest issue I had with the student bringing up Xinjiang and China's detention of the Uyghurs in that province is not that I think we shouldn't talk about it. I'm not some historical revisionist who thinks that things that are unfavorable we just don't discuss. But things that we are discussing, we ought to have something to say about them. And this man's commentary on Xinjiang wasn't substantial. It wasn't engaged. It was just, oh, well, remember that place also. And I think that that's the same sort of strategy that the national media and that the political establishment uses to discredit China. They say, hey, look at what they're doing to these Muslims in Xinjiang. Isn't this so bad? So, yes, the answer is yes, it's bad. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a good thing to do. I think it's irresponsible, really. But ultimately, China disagrees with me, and the Chinese government is going to act in accordance with what it believes is best, or what they believe they need to do for their, whatever purposes, and purposes with which I disagree, obviously. But to say that the cultural genocide, or genocide as it's been, called in international news, to, with some credibility, obviously. I mean, these are things that happen. People are being taken to detention camps, extended periods of time, no trials, things like that, or were, I should say. And that's bad. But the idea that this is comparable to the wholesale destruction of Gaza, it's laughable. And so I think like these are the sorts of like mental this is the way that people who do not want to face the truth are able to entertain their bad arguments for the things that they believe in, right? He couldn't say to me, hey, look, America's a better country. Let me tell you why it's a better country. He had to say China's actually just as bad. You didn't even understand because in the Xinjiang province, China is doing a genocide. That is not an engagement that reflects a care or understanding about the issue at all. That being said, again, bad thing. I don't think China should have done that, should be doing that, etc. The counterterrorism measure, I think it's stupid. But why do I actually like China? So I don't like China in some sort of dogmatic China's perfect sort of way. I like China for specific reasons. And I like China because when you look at how China uses its power and you look at how Western countries use its power, China recognizes or the Chinese government at least recognizes the most basic fact of governments, which is that economies are not independent of them. Here in neoliberal capitalism, fucking hell world, okay, we were told that, well, the government just needs to help the economy chug along. As long as the government can just keep its hands off the economy, its dirty little government hands off the economy, then look, we're all going to be okay. This is a lie. This is how the elites, how the rich, how the powerful in this country steal your money. Because they tell you that what you really, really, really don't want is the government to be in charge. Because, ooh, what would the scary government do? So I raise this question. If China doesn't have a democracy, yet their government, their very scary government, has taken clear and decisive measures to improve the conditions of the Chinese people. Meanwhile, our government does have a democracy and for some reason has found it so difficult to take those same measures. Is it not then absolutely clear that the thing in question is not whether or not governments are good or bad. It's whether or not governments are empowered or disempowered. In China, the Chinese government can do what the Chinese government believes it needs to do. Period. That is and always should be the power of a government. Why is it that in America, governments often have to say, we tried our hardest. We know we have homeless people and we tried to build housing, but I don't know. Some guy said he owned the land and it was all difficult. We just went to sleep. We went and got brunch instead. This is how politics works in America. And it's embarrassing. So if the trade-off is, we don't get to have democracy, but we'll have a government that works in our interests, I think that the government that works in your interests is always going to be the better option. And I don't think it's possible to have a government that works in your interests that is also subservient to an economic system. Capitalism is not maintained by natural forces of greed that pervade every single human soul. That's not a true thing at all. It's ridiculous. Capitalism is maintained by contract law. Dumbass. If you can't have a contract and you can't have a police force, you don't have capitalism because you don't have anyone to enforce this idea that this is your business and they can't copy what your business does. Patent law, all this shit. It's the government that makes capitalism, period. And the same is true for any economic system. You need a governing body that dictates whose claims are valid and whose claims aren't. Private property, entirely dependent on a legal infrastructure, legal law, government. Easy. That being said, I think there are more reasons that China is good. More specific reasons, I will say. It's good that China is not subservient to an economic system. I think that's great. But I also think China is inspiring. And China inspires me not because money is good. China inspires me because China operates in the international system with strategy. Unlike Western powers, which have first of all, I'm not saying that they're devoid of strategy with what I'm going to say here. These are not mutually exclusive, being strategic versus the violence that I'm going to say is more characteristic or more definitive of Western foreign policy. But Western foreign policy leans on violence. It is not about how to engender, positive relations with different peoples of the world who have different needs and different wants, different, cultural practices, all types of things. These aren't the calculations that are being made by Western powers. Western powers have it's really simple actually, because it always comes down to profit, or at least it has for so long. Overthrowing Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1955, for example, that was about profit. Overthrowing Maduro, which is likely coming, about profit. Trying to overthrow Iranian regime, about profit. It's always about profit for American foreign policy. And that's stupid. That is the tail wagging the dog. Again, if the economic system is in charge and the government is not in charge, then what that means is that whoever is empowered by this economic system is who's in charge. And we can see that in our economic system, where we've allowed stupid, weird-ass, fucking hyper-autistic tech bros. And as an autistic something myself, don't let these people be in charge of you. Are you crazy? But well, don't let these tech bros shouldn't be in charge of you. You know, who should be in charge of you. You should be able to. You and your community should be the ones dictating what your life looks like, not some Silicon Valley weirdo, who probably fucking got bullied until he was 23 for not talking to girls or something. I don't know. These are weird guys. Is my point. But in America and in the Western world, our foreign policy is dictated by what is profitable. Lots of things are profitable. Violence is profitable. War is profitable. Death is profitable. But are those things good? China's foreign policy, on the other hand, I believe, is more geared towards what actually will help China and Chinese citizens. And you can disagree with a number of things or a number of ways that this is like manifested. You don't have to say, "Oh, I love China," but to recognize China's greatness is to recognize that politics need not be about who can deploy the most military force to crush, small socialist rebellion. Politics, international politics, can actually be about a mutually beneficial trade. Things like that. And I just really do love and appreciate that China actually seems to be showing the world a model of power that isn't predicated on shooting you in the head. And I think that's going to be really good for the rest of the world, regardless of what detractors may say. And I hope that China is able to fully dethrone the United States as the global hegemon. I mean, I hope it does so soon because, it's about damn time. And so many people are dying for no reason. I don't think that's the kind of thing we'd see under a Chinese global order. But that's the crux of my video. Not very much more to really go over. I just think, I'd love to have a conversation about this as well. I actually don't talk about China on these terms nearly as much as I should. I've been researching on my own for a little bit. Researching. But, I think China definitely just has some good things going. And I think it's a real shame that people can't recognize that, because here we rive in our late stage capitalist hellscape, dystopia, bullshit, nonsense, fake wannabe economy. Okay. Our education systems are crumbling and our leaders, you know what? Actually, no, I have a final point. I do have a final point. There's a seriousness with which Chinese officials take their jobs that is so awe-inducing, really. Because when I have to look at the heads of all of these government agencies in the United States, while the United States is experiencing crises on every single front, we have a teacher shortage still. Of course we do. We have a crisis of learning. Of course we do. We have a crisis of healthcare. Of course we do. We have a crisis of like basic education. A lot of people, our literacy is going down, and I don't care about, an article or a study or whatever. I talk to people, man. Shit is tricky. It is tricky. Not looking good. Not looking good for the future. But Look at what Dr. Mehmet Oz is talking about. Is this motherfucker talking about how we're going to actually improve our healthcare system? Is Donald Trump talking about how to improve your life? Is Kirsty Noem talking about what the government can do to... Kirsty Noem, yeah, that's the DHS. Wait, it doesn't matter. Kirsty Noem isn't talking about shit, but, how she can shoot another dog. These people are so unserious. They're so unserious, and they have nothing remotely approximating your best interest in mind. And they're not gonna go anywhere. Their power is absolute, and our power is what? It's a shame. It's a real shame. And I think... in the political future I envision, everyone's going to get a lot more Chinese. Deliver, do things, solve problems. That is what politics needs to be about, because that's what politics has always been about. That's why we started it in the first place. And if we don't return to that, I'm not liking the odds for American future, quite frankly. But, that's a whole different subject. Yeah. I could have obviously been a lot more concise. This was really a spur of a moment thing. But W China is all I can say. W China, fucking run with that shit, man. They got the economic might to never be excised from this system, and I'm loving it. I'm loving every bit of it.